The adjacent possible. The adjacent possible can be defined as the set of possibilities available to individuals, communities, institutions, organisms, productive processes, etc., at a given point in time during their evolution. That comes from someone named Loretto in 2015. I turned 40 last year. I didn't think about turning 40 much before I did, but for some reason I think about being 60 all the time. I've got a notes page on my iPad where I set long-term goals. As a part of his morning routine, most days, Donald Miller reads his 20-year goals. That process has helped him grow a pretty successful business coaching and marketing business. So I thought I'd try the same thing. It's helpful to set big, lofty future goals, but it's useless if you don't look at them and find ways to attack the goal regularly. I've noticed after looking at those goals, 75 out of 100 days, you start to memorize them. When you memorize your goals, you think about them more often, and when you think about them regularly, you find ways to take small steps to achieve your goals. One of my 20-year goals is for We Got This to grow linearly or a little bit every year. It doesn't totally matter what that growth looks like, but not growing isn't an option. Andre Lee Ellis, the man that started We Got This, would do this thing when I would walk over to talk to him. After saying hello and catching up, he would smile and tell me about something he had in the works. He always had something in the works. He still does. When I think about the evolution of my neighborhood, I think about the adjacent possible. I spent 2 years working with a group of people building a school. During that process, we used the adjacent possible. We just didn't know it was called that. When you think that way, you can't help but dream what is possible. When you dream what's possible and you look at your dreams over and over again, you start to turn those dreams into reality. The school was in an old middle school, which used to be an old elementary school. We didn't have traditional gym classes, which meant kids didn't change for gym. Without kids changing for gym, we didn't need a locker room, but the school had two. The girls' locker room was converted into a community closet space where we got donations from the community. Inside of the locker room were racks of clothes kids from the school could take for free, along with backpacks full of food and personal hygiene products. The boys' locker room sat and begged the question, what should I be? Lots of things beg the question, what should I be? 53206 has 800 vacant lots, spaces that might have had a house sitting on it at one point, or open fields that were never developed. One of those spaces asked Andre what it should be, and a garden was his answer. I think that way when I walk into a house I'm looking at buying for the first time. I wonder what this could be. What's possible for one of the worst neighborhoods in Milwaukee? Standing in the boys' locker room of a converted middle school, the space was telling us it wanted to be something. Unused for over a decade, it smelled like an abandoned locker room, like sweat and body odor, but it also smelled like possibility. I don't believe anything has to stay the way it is. When I walked into the crack house owned by the slumlord for the first time, the space wasn't telling me it wanted to be a crack house. It was saying it wanted to be affordable, stable housing for 2 family units. I'm not clairvoyant, so I couldn't see who would live there, but I knew I'd like them, and I would be happy to have them as my neighbor. I had a vision for what it could become. Some visions are grandiose. Sometimes grandiose visions are within the adjacent possible. Sometimes the visions are simple. Those ones are almost always possible. Small steps in a larger vision of what something could become. Simply because something is this way doesn't mean it has to stay this way. Reggie Jackson is an author, speaker, and segregation expert. Reggie grew up a few blocks from our house. He's a little older than me, so we never lived here at the same time. Reggie has told me something several other people who I have met that are originally from the neighborhood have shared. He told me this was a great place to grow up. He told me it used to be different here. The idea that something can be one way now and someday be something different fascinates me. It reminds me of the boys' locker room, standing there smelling body odor and the remnants of hastily snuck cigarette smoke. It was obvious that space wanted to be an aquaponics lab. While it is currently an old locker room, there's no reason it shouldn't be full of plants, grow lights, and tilapia. So what does our neighborhood want to be? What does any neighborhood want to be? First and foremost, this is a black neighborhood. It was a black neighborhood by design. Through racist and discriminatory practices, it was turned into one. For a period of time it worked, and then it didn't work so well. I believe it wants to stay that way, maybe not forever, but for a while. It's important that people who look like me or those who are not from around here move cautiously. I can't really name that feeling, but I know it's there. A few months ago, we got white neighbors for the first time. First, a woman and her son moved into the ugly blue house. From an economic status perspective, they appear to fit into what is currently represented here. That's one way of saying they do not look like they are well off financially. They rent a crappy unit in a duplex that is falling apart. They drive an old Honda Accord, and I haven't noticed the woman keeping regular work hours. It's crazy to say this, but as a white man, it is scary when another white person moves into the neighborhood. It's evidence of change. The house next door to us is a triplex. A month after the woman and her son moved into the ugly blue house, another white family rented one of the units in the triplex. I don't know if my hesitation to having white neighbors is only from fear of change, but I know change happens slowly and incrementally. It's just that I've never heard one of my neighbors say, you know what we need here is more white people. I hear a lot of the opposite, fear that if we did become less homogenous, that would lead to all sorts of other problems. Sometimes you can tease out what a thing wants to be by listening for what it doesn't want to be. Currently, our neighborhood is prone to outbursts of violence. Violence and poverty are directly correlated. I've heard all sorts of people talk about how they wish the neighborhood was less violent. To be less violent, it may have to be less poor. Currently, it is overwhelmingly poor. I didn't totally get this at first. I mean, I understood that 53206 was the poorest zip code in Wisconsin. I Googled it before we moved here, and that was why we wanted to live here. What I didn't get was that it wasn't all poor. Next door to a house that caught fire years before might sit a beautiful, well-maintained house owned by the same person for 50 years. I think the neighborhood wants more of that. It wants more fixtures of the neighborhood, like Charlie Pace or Old Robert. It wants more elders, people who have taken up roots here and found personal success in life. To foster more elders, the housing needs stabilization. We need people who stick around for a while. It's why I'm in support of anything that keeps people in their homes long term, if that's something that they want. The adjacent possible, what could happen based on what is currently happening, might look like what I try to do with the rental properties we own. Those units are nicer than 95% of the rental units in the zip code. When someone moves in, they feel like they have something they don't want to lose, so they stay. We need more of that. It's possible that we could have more of that. Sometimes I'll hear about a person that studies something like poverty, for example. I think it would be weird to ever make that claim about myself. I don't live here to study anyone, but that doesn't mean I don't notice things, especially about poverty. As much as poverty and violence are tied together, poverty and education are correlated. I believe trauma and socioeconomic status are massive factors that play into a person's ability to be, in quotes, a good student. One that sits quietly and listens to the teacher, absorbing the information that is espoused to them. I've noticed that. Quickly, a child whose behavior is corrected repeatedly begins to develop a negative connotation with school, which unfortunately is synonymous with education. I've seen hundreds of examples of a child hating school, but not making the mental leap that school is a structure for educating large groups of young people and not a representation of the value or even the real-life way of learning something. A young person without life experience sees the act of learning something new as school instead of the pathway out of their current life circumstances. They see the acquisition of a marketable skill, the thing that you do to go make money, as school. There are nearly endless possibilities or things that qualify as the adjacent possible in terms of education within our neighborhood because the bar is currently set so low. In the 1950s and 1960s, Milwaukee had thousands of good-paying factory jobs. If you were disciplined, showed up on time, and learned the particular skill to do the factory work, you could easily find employment. The pathway was simple, not necessarily easy, but not complex. Today it isn't as simple, but it's far from complicated. With high school dropout rates in the 30, 40, and 50% for some schools, we create young people with a confused understanding of the value of learning a skill. I support anything that helps promote the acquisition of marketable skills and personal growth of my neighbors. When I hear some of the elders talk about the neighborhood, they speak about it in a certain way. They are nostalgic. Nostalgia is the fond remembrance of the past. Embedded in nostalgia is pride. We are missing things to be proud of here. It is one of the pillars of our value documents for We Got This, that We Got This would be a point of pride for the neighborhood. 6 months ago, I had no idea who the Crusher was. Reginald Lazowski, the Crusher, was a wrestler. He wrestled in the 1950s and 1960s and was known as the wrestler that made Milwaukee famous. I feel like I had heard of him before, but it's totally possible I just assumed he was a wrestler with a name like the Crusher. Reginald was from the town of South Milwaukee, where they celebrate him every year with something called Crusher Fest, which boasts polka music, cold beer, and live wrestling. South Milwaukee is oddly proud of the Crusher, and I guess I would be too if I lived there. Points of pride for a city or a neighborhood are a reminder that anything is possible. We need more of that in my neighborhood and neighborhoods like mine. Whether it's a person that lived an extraordinary life or an organization or business that excels, we need that to show us what we can be. When you are best known for shootings, drug deals, poverty, and struggle, it's hard to see your potential as anything beyond that. Without the vision for a potential better future, that future is seemingly impossible to realize. That's why I support any movement in the adjacent possible that supports developing points of pride for the neighborhood. What I see existing as the easiest next step for us, the collective us, is to reframe how the way we talk about neighborhoods like mine. Words have tremendous power, and our thoughts shape our actions. It would not surprise me if the thing keeping our neighborhood the way it is the way the greater community talks about it. If I'm told enough times that I'm bad at something, I never progress into something better. Conversely, when I am told that I'm good at something, I aspire to be better. Every time you or I refer to my neighborhood as bad or shady, every time the current narrative is perpetuated, it stymies the evolution towards something better. The only reason bad neighborhoods exist is because we label them that way. My hope for taking the time to write all of this down is to spur individuals to find what lies in the adjacent possible, to see the next logical progression for spaces where the progression lately has been decay, decline, and despair. If we learn enough about a place and the people that live there, those of us with the means can use whatever our access allows to make a positive, productive change without fear of pushing an agenda on an already marginalized group. Just because things are the way they are now doesn't mean they have to be that way forever. When I think about the people I've talked about in this collection of episodes, I want better for them. I think you also want better for them. Better can take 1,000 different forms, but what ties all those forms together is a natural movement and progression toward a better world. If we stand in the way of progress or we take up space ignorant to the potential for progress, we only exacerbate the problem when 1,000 different solutions can be found in the adjacent possible. 3 years after emptying out gym lockers full of stale t-shirts and dirty underwear, the aquaponics lab produced its first harvest. A year after that, the lettuce grown in the lab was given out at lunch in the form of salads. Anything is possible if you find a cause you care about and have a vision for something better. 18 years ago, I walked into our house for the first time and saw what it could be. If you are the kind of person that is deeply dissatisfied with the way things are, find a cause. Collectively, we hold the power to change anything in this world we want. Never downplay your part in that change. Never stop trying to understand the problems that you care about. Name it and find one possible solution. Test it out and see what happens, and then look to what is possible just beyond what exists today. The first time I walked into our house, I had no idea it would take Meg and I on an adventure. Even during the years where I wondered what the hell I was doing, I found nothing more satisfying in life than the pursuit of something better for my neighborhood. I figured the satisfaction would subside over time, but the more time I spend in the neighborhood, the more I want to be there. The more I learn about race and poverty, the more I want to know. A life spent trying to make the world a little better is a life well spent. So go out there, find what's possible, and shake some shit up.